Papa Murphy's $7.99 everyday value lineup of take and bake pizzas are, well, a pretty big deal for a pretty small price. We're talking big savings on big flavors, like our new bold shredded pepperoni pizza, crumbled sausage pizza, or classic cheese pizza, all for the small price of $7.99 each. So head to Papa Murphy's, because with freshly made large pizzas at this price, you can afford to bake a big-time deliciousness all day, every day. Papa Murphy's, change the way you pizza.
This is a Queen Bee Radio High School sports presentation.
It's the Papa Murphys of Platteville and Prairie Chien High School Football Roundup on the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. We have a full lineup covering the Level 1 playoff results from last week and the Level 2 playoffs that we have coming up on Friday night. Our lineup today, we have Gary Craugh, Wally Trouten, Matthew Goninen, and Scott Tolzman. And make sure you check out the Papa Murphy $7.99 everyday value lineup. It's a big deal for a small price. We're talking large pizzas with new shredded pepperoni, crumbled sausage, or classic cheese for $7.99 each, which means you can afford big-time deliciousness at Papa Murphy's of Platteville and Prairie du Chien. Let's start off with Division 4 Level 1 action, where we saw the Platteville Hillmen fall to West Salem 30-27. Gary and Wally, you were on the call of that game. And Gary, let's start off with you because, getting the text during the game, it felt like that, Platteville was taking it to West Salem, that they had a double-digit lead and, could pull off the upset as the 6 seed, knocking off the 3 seed. But West Salem comes back to get the win. Take us through the game and what you thought of the end result, which ultimately ended Platteville's season.
Well, initially when West Salem went up 7-0, I kind of wondered how Platteville was going to react. I mean, considering the season they've had, they were kind of up and down. You didn't really know what you were going to get at any one time. Platteville came back and tied the score. I mean, they looked sharp. One of the biggest things that I thought Platteville, and having not seen Platteville a lot this year, the biggest question mark I had would have been their offensive line. And the offensive line, I thought, did an outstanding job. TJ Pink got sacked, I think, once on the night, and he had time. He did a fair amount of rolling out, but he had time to throw, look for his receivers. And the running of Tyler Sass, it wasn't one of his, 200-yard games, but he ran efficiently when he had to. When Platteville went up on them at halftime, misplaced my sheet with the score was at halftime. But anyhow, Platteville went up at halftime, and I tell you, the Platteville stands were hopping. Fans were going nuts. Platteville held their own in the second half, and I think it wasn't that the defense played poorly. I think it was the fact that they got wore down. West Salem came in with an offensive line that, if I remember my notes correctly, I think averaged right around 240. And the defense was on the field for a fair amount of time. And in the end, it came down to that winning field goal with time expiring, and that Platteville gave it everything they could, but it just came up a little bit short.
Yep, and Wally, when you kind of reflect on Platteville's season as a whole, they finished 5-5. As Gary said, a very up and down season, maybe by comparison to what we were anticipating Platteville being able to accomplish this season. What do you take away from the final game of the season and Platteville's season as a whole?
I'm going to back up to this game just a little bit. I think, Gary hit it right. It was a matter of just wearing them down really more at the end because of the size that West Salem had up front, plus a big, strong running back that really, he delivered a lot of power when he ran the ball. I was shocked as to, after you got past that opening drive, how all of a sudden Platteville basically shut him down for a while. And it was a matter of the defensive line that played up a notch, so linebackers were able to come back in and make plays. And he didn't find himself into the secondary that much after that first drive. So, I mean, compliments to Platteville there. Coming into the season, Platteville didn't look good. I mean, you lost most of your linemen. You had some good skilled kids coming back, but you were going to be short up front. You're bringing back one lineman. Yeah, he's pretty good, but still, only one guy coming back. And there were some limitations on what some of those guys up front could do because of the experience they had. So I was really surprised at how far they came during the year. I thought they came a long way. The biggest negative that I think Platteville had in a lot of games during the season is they started slow. If you don't, you need to come out with a bang, and they just weren't able to do that for whatever reason. And they found themselves really sometimes in a hole and unable to dig out of it. When they played well right away, basically they won the game in the end. It's kind of tough when you think about it in that manner. But this was a young team. This really is. I mean, they do not have a lot of seniors that are playing on this football team.
Right.
They've got some sophomores and a bunch of juniors. Tell you what, next year they're going to be a force. They really are, because you've got some linemen that will come back in with some experience. And yeah, you're losing a couple of good people, but you still have a real good running back coming back. I mean, and he proved that this year. Yes, you lose your quarterback, but mark my words, I don't think the backup quarterback is all that bad either. I know the pedigree that he's able to bring forth is pretty good. So I think Platteville's going to be tough as we move into next year. It's unfortunate that they weren't able to continue. The West Salem coach afterwards made the comment to me. He said that, because they said, well, congratulations on the win. That means you get to see Columbus. And he said, actually, we're not worried about Columbus. They're a running team. They don't throw the ball.
Yeah.
We can shut down the run.
Yeah.
Well, they proved that against Platteville. That's going to be a good game next week.
You could say they shut down the run. However, Tyler Sass did run over. I found some of my notes, 114 yards.
Yep.
And against that defense from West Salem, that was pretty darn good. And Pink with just short of 250 yards passing, they can get the ball around.
Yeah, other stat lines for Platteville. TJ Pink, 17 of 27 passing for 247 yards and 3 touchdowns. Also threw an interception. Jerome Blevins, 3 receptions for 110 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns on the game. So the offensive stat lines certainly indicate that Platteville was very much in the mix, and obviously, had some success being able to move the football against West Salem. But as we know in the postseason, you're going to be facing other playoff teams, and it was just West Salem came through in the clutch and got the game-winning field goal to defeat Platteville 30-27. Again, Platteville finishes their season with a 5-5 overall record. Let's move into the Division 5 part of the football playoffs, where Prairie du Chien was all over Southwestern East Dubuque, 48-0. For some context, it was 35-0 at the end of the first quarter. The first quarter of that game. Blake Thierry with another Blake Thierry type of game, 7 attempts for 139 yards, 2 touchdowns. Also had 1 catch for 61 yards. Also scored on that play. Abe Amundsen, 5 of 5 passing for 135 yards and 4 touchdowns. So 1 pass that didn't go for a touchdown. That's not a bad night. And Prairie du Chien advances to take on the number 5 seed Brookfield Academy Blue Knights. The Blue Knights are 9-2 on the season, 6-1, co-champs of the Midwest Classic Small Conference. They tied for the co-championship with Kenosha St. Joseph, who just beat Racine Lutheran in Level 1, 31-28. And then Darlington defeated Richland Center 42-14. Maddox Goebel, 11 carries for 87 yards and 2 touchdowns. Zeke Zuberbuehler, 4 of 8 passing for 122 yards and 2 touchdowns. 3 different receivers for Darlington had receiving touchdowns. And Darlington takes on the Milwaukee Academy of Science Novas, a team that is 10-1 on the season. They were undefeated conference champions in the Midwest Classic Large Conference. Their only loss was a makeup game that they had with Division III's Grafton. back on October 18th. And the Novas defeated New Glarus in level 1, 46-35. Scott, let's start off with Prairie du Chien. We just got to see them a couple weeks ago against Lancaster. Prairie du Chien, their 8th consecutive game where they had a running clock on their opponent. We mentioned last week that they had a running clock on every opponent in the SWC this year. Say what you will about the computer rankings, but I definitely think that Prairie du Chien earned themselves the number 1 seed, and they very much looked the part through the level 1 playoff.
Yeah, Prairie du Chien it's well-rounded. I mean, it's got a good offense. They can run the ball, throw the ball. It's got a good defense. And special teams have been standouts for what I've seen them play. They're a good team. They're going to be tough to beat. It's going to take an exceptional team to beat them. And I really think the team that beats them is going to be winning due to the fact that Prairie du Chien shoots themselves in their foot. West Salem or Columbus could give them a good game. I know West Salem just lost to Aquinas during the year. Columbus, very stout team. I look at Prairie du Chien getting by this second game and then setting up for a good third game in level 3.
Yeah, if Prairie du Chien and Darlington win, they would actually play each other in level 3, which would be a very intriguing matchup. Where again, Prairie du Chien beat Darlington 35-7 in the second week of the season. Shark and Matthew with Darlington coming out to win against Richland Center, taking on the Milwaukee Academy of Science Novas, which is first team all syllables with a number of words and stuff like that in that name. But and for those who were paying attention to the WIA brackets, there was an accidental error where it said that Milwaukee Academy of Science had won and had already advanced to level 3. It looks like there was an error with the way that the scores were inputted, but Shark again, Darlington advancing to the level 2 playoff and getting a nice win against Richland Center, but a tough matchup against a Milwaukee school. Kind of curious to see how that one plays out.
Well, they've never ever played each other ever before. Of course, Milwaukee Academy of Science is a fairly new school. So yeah, you don't know what to make of some of these, but I have found that over the years that some of those schools, some of those newer schools, teams from Southwest Wisconsin seem to match up well against them. Case in point, a few years ago when Lake Country Lutheran faced off against Blackhawk, or maybe it would have been Blackhawk Warren at that time, but Blackhawk Warren played extremely well in winning that playoff game, and there's been a few others like that too. So I don't think anything will phase Darlington at all unless they run into a team that's just got such a dynamic running back that he's going to be good for well over 100 yards rushing, maybe 200 yards rushing in a particular game, and there's just no way to stop that guy. I think that Darlington will, being at home, they will compete well against Milwaukee Academy of Science. And, well, when you take a look at things ahead, there's a reward for that, and that's a chance to play the Prairie du Chiens and compete in Division 5, where this is the first year that Darlington has done that, and that is to compete in Division 5.
Yeah, again, the performance factor elevates them to Division 5, not playing in Division 6 like they normally would. And Matthew, you've been talking all season long about Zeke Zuberbuehler, the way that he's played. Again, just 4 of 8 passing for 122 yards and 2 touchdowns. But as we know with Darlington, they have multiple ways and multiple ball carriers that can beat any opponent. And, Darlington kind of getting their feet under them again after that loss to Cuba City a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be a really
Oh, go ahead, Matt.
I think this is going to be a really interesting matchup on a lot of different levels. First of all, it's just how these two teams play stylistically. We know that Darlington, they love the run game. They love to stick to that versus Milwaukee Academy of Science. This year has a quarterback who's got nearly 2,400 yards passing. So very different styles of offenses that are going to face up. But kind of as you mentioned with Darlington getting their legs back under him, their feet back under him here, I would not want to have to match up against Darlington at this point in the season. They take that loss. to Cuba City. They don't win the SWAL for the first time in a long time, and they've got a lot of hungry guys. It feels like over the last couple of years, they've come so close to so many things, and now facing that challenge up in Division 5, you could say that they might be an easy team to game plan against, but in reality, they are a very dynamic team. They can run trick plays that can be confusing. They have talented, tall, wide receivers that can bring in balls, and they've got a promising young quarterback. So they're not as one-dimensional as people think. And it's going to be a very interesting game. Hard to predict, at least on my end, how this one's going to end up in level 2. But Darlington certainly has a good case as to why I think they could win that one.
I look at the matchup from another point of view of a team that likes to throw the ball and all of that against a team that really likes to run the ball and pound it and do that kind of a thing. A lot of times I look at the team that can really run the ball well and say they keep the ball away from that team that can score quick by throwing the ball. And that's one of the things Darlington can do. Unless you're really, really good up front and at the linebacker position, you're going to have your hands full playing Darlington. You really are. And that's one of the things that'll be real interesting to it. Darlington has had a history of playing pretty good on defense as well, not just up front, but in the secondary as well. I mean, they've got some kids back there that play against the pass pretty good. And you got guys up front that can put on a good pass rush. Darlington is well deserved of being the number 2 seed. They've earned that. There's no doubt in my mind. How good really is the Milwaukee Academy of Science? None of us have a clue, really. We can only go based on what we've read because we haven't seen what they can do against a similar type opponent to Darlington, somebody that can really pound the rock on you if they want to. I think that becomes interesting. And if you go up in the top of the bracket with Prairie du Chien, I don't care. I didn't care whether it was Brookfield Academy or Racine Lutheran playing them. Again, they're going to have their hands full. This is probably one of the best Prairie du Chien football teams that's come out in the last number of years. They've had some good ones in the past. This one may be one of the better ones because they do a lot of things and they do a lot of them very well. And it isn't just the idea of, again, running the ball or being able to throw the ball. It's the other side of the ball, I think, where they've excelled, because they shut down some pretty good people.
Yep, agreed. Again, the matchups in Division 5 that we're following, it'll be Prairie du Chien taking on Brookfield Academy and Darlington taking on the Milwaukee Academy of Science. Let's move into Division 6, again, where the seedings made absolutely zero sense whatsoever, but let's see how everything played out. Let's start off with the matchup that Shark and I had on 97.7 Country WGR and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. Lancaster defeating Westby 29-7. Nolan Wolf on the game, 6 of 9 passing for 83 yards and a touchdown. Also had 14 rushing attempts for 117 yards and 2 touchdowns, but a major injury happening in the fourth quarter. He was hit out of bounds on the far sideline on Westby's side. Game was paused for about 10 minutes, if not more. Turns out it is a significant leg break, so Nolan Wolf will not be quarterbacking for Lancaster going forward. Toy Raggets will be the quarterback, we assume, unless Jordan Rollins being creative and going to put someone else in there. But again, for Lancaster as well, Nolan Hinkey rushing 17 attempts for 122 yards and 2 touchdowns. Shark, from what I remember of that game, the first half, it kind of felt like Lancaster kind of let Westby hang around with them before they really started getting things going in that third quarter. And then, of course, after the injury to Nolan Wolf, it kind of felt like the air left the stadium in Lancaster. And now the question for Lancaster becomes, how do they adjust to another injury to this revolving door of injured players that Lancaster's had to deal with all season long?
Tyler, when Henke left the game, and my gosh, the holdup was probably close to 20 minutes. They were tending to him off of the playing surface of the field while both teams stuck around and showed their support for an injured player. Then Toy Raggets came in, and I think he was instructed, let's not do anything wacky. Let's not do any handing off. Let's just run the football up the middle. Toy, you take the football and just dive ahead. Just dive ahead. Just run the clock down as much as you can, and then we'll get out of here and we'll start game planning for the following week, because Lancaster didn't show the anything that was maybe going to show that they had some other game plans that they want to get Toy Raggets into. No, they just simply straight ahead, gain 1 or 2 yards, punt the football in the end, and then play some good defense. It's really tough. It's really tough to replace a quarterback like Nolan Wolf. He's kind of an unsung player for Lancaster. Nobody really talks that much about him, but you're talking about a guy who completed 116 of 187 passes for almost 1,700 yards. That's a completion percentage of 62% and a quarterback rating of 101.3. That's pretty good. It's pretty hard to replace. But as you said, Tyler, maybe Coach Rowland is going to really have lots of talks with Toy Raggets and the rest of the coaching staff. So, okay, here's what we're going to do. And we didn't show a whole lot of that in the last game, and for that matter, even for the whole season. So they'll have to go the rest of the way. It could be a battle of the backup quarterbacks come Friday night between Cuba City and Lancaster.
Yeah, very well could be. And we mentioned it during the broadcast, too, that with all the injuries and all the different players that Coach Rowland has had to, rotate in to get that offense going, the one constant through all of that was Nolan Wolf. And he's been the catalyst of everything. And now that part is not part of the equation anymore. And, I'm very curious to see how the Arrows come out and play with Toy Raggets, who we presume is going to be the starting quarterback. He's been the backup quarterback in multiple situations throughout the season. I would anticipate that is the same, but, things could change, in a span of a week, depending on what the game plan might be. And of course, this matchup with Cuba City is going to be a rematch of the game from week 2, where Cuba City dominated Lancaster 42-14. And if we've learned anything about rematches, Matthew will allude to this in a little bit, where Cuba City dominated Mineral Point in the first matchup, but Mineral Point gave Cuba City a game last week. So with the injuries, it feels like this Lancaster-Cuba City game might be more of a toss-up now than what we might have originally thought once the pairings came out, Shark.
Oh, yeah, no doubt about that. Now, remember, Lancaster has a lot of other weapons, but I certainly hope that everyone takes into account just how good Nolan Wolf has been. I mean, he makes that offense purr. But again, you've got a rushing attack when you've got Nolan Hankey, who just runs between the tackles and just runs between the tackles and runs some more between the tackles. Hard to take down. Other people that have contributed on offense: Peyton Hale, Dane Kaufman, Brennan Gildersleeve at times. So there's some other options there for the Lancaster Flying Arrows, and even throwing the football. You can get one out to Quentin Plessel. This year, he's caught 30 passes for 465 yards, an average of 15.5 yards per catch, and 4 touchdowns. Brennan Gildersleeve, he's made a difference as well, too. So if you can get those guys into a consistent mix during the game, yeah, you can hold your own definitely against Cuba City.
As I look kind of at coming up with this, and Scott, I think you're going to agree with me. You've got a different quarterback. That changes the dynamic of your team immediately. I mean, you don't have a guy that's going to throw the ball quite the same as Wolf does. And he's going to be more of, I don't know how well he runs, but which would be more typical Lancaster when you get a quarterback who can run with the football. But we're looking at somebody here who will probably be doing more handing off than anything else. And it changes the dynamic of the team. If I'm looking at where the biggest problem is, Cuba City has to figure out how they're going to defend the difference and what the difference will be.
Yeah, and there's not a lot there to study. There might be some, blowout games or something like that Cuba City might be able to, game plan for. But Scott, your thoughts on going into this game with a backup quarterback and potentially facing another backup quarterback in this matchup.
Your quarterbacks are important in the sense of you take your offense and design it around their strong points. And bringing in a new quarterback this time of year with limited film on him, it can create some trouble. On the other hand, you got 1 week to try to put everything together. And you got to make sure that you at least got 10 good running plays that can complement the pass plays. Mm-hmm. That way you can assure yourselves some luck. I mean, you're looking at 10 plays with between the running and passing, you're probably putting in 20, 25 plays total for that quarterback. So it will be interesting. I know talking to Coach Kopp, he's hoping to have his starter back, but it all depends on how well that arm will heal up. So,
I also talked with Coach Kopp, and he said, you know what? He says, I'm not worried about my backup sophomore. He said that kid is better than what a lot of people realize he is. In fact, I mean, when you're graduating as senior, am I worried about him being a quarterback next year? No. He said, I'm not. But then you look at the other things that Cuba City brings. They bring a lot of weapons. I mean, some of the better receivers in the area are on the Cuba City team. I mean, who wouldn't want to have Vasan on their team? I mean, this is a kid who does some things when he catches the ball, and he catches the ball very well. And that's just naming one. I think it's going to be an interesting matchup with backup quarterbacks, assuming that's what happens. But even so, I think you're going to be looking at a game that it all depends on Cuba City's defense. I think that's what it's going to depend on more than either team's offense. I think that's where it's going to be. The difference will be.
Now let's talk about the Cuba City defense, because Matthew, you were on the call of the game against Mineral Point last Friday night on Super Hits 106. Cuba City again winning against Mineral Point 14-13. More of a rock fight, perhaps, type of game than what the first matchup was, where Cuba City won in blowout fashion. Kind of take us through the flow of the game and how exciting of a finish that game was on Friday.
Yeah, Tyler, it truly was a fantastic game, and Scott was on the call that with me, and it was really an interesting game in the sense that, just like the first game, it didn't really feel like any team had much of an edge throughout the first half. Cuba City led at the half of the week 4 game and at the half of the level 1 game against Mineral Point, 14-0 both times. The difference came, though, with Tyson Richard getting hurt on one end, and on the other end, Mineral Point has since figured out an identity. They were kind of trying to figure out what that offensive identity was going to look like in week 4, but at this point in the season, they had something pieced together. So those two things combined, that was able to keep Mineral Point in that game. And Cuba City brought in 2 different quarterbacks to replace Richard in the second half. But the places where Mineral Point was able to get some opportunities came from some creative play calls. Their first touchdown was set up by a pitch play to the halfback who threw the ball downfield, and that drive was capped off by a 4th and 10 throw into triple coverage to the running back for a touchdown. And one thing that was also apparent with Cuba City is some miscues in some of the little things in a lot of the second half. They really struggled to run the football. I think not having maybe some of that confidence for the quarterback to throw the ball for much of that half, and not having Richard, they opted to go to the run game, and Mineral Point did a fantastic job at shutting down that run game. They have a very talented defensive front. But one thing is there were about 3 or 4 drives in a row where the snap to the punter, Henry Cruiser, was low. It hit the ground. They had problems with their long snapping. And on the 4th time, Cruiser picked up the ball on his own goal line, where he was met by some Mineral Point defenders. He was forced to throw the ball for a turnover on downs, and Mineral Point was able to punch it in there. Now, that one made it 14-13, and the play that the game was decided on was a 2-point conversion play where Mineral Point decided, instead of trying to tie the game up and at this point probably play for a win in overtime, they wanted to go out and try and win the game right then and there. Designed quarterback keeper. They did not get it in the end zone, so Cuba City was able to make a stand, and Mineral Point did have a chance, but Cuba City continued to step up in that game. So just the flow of that game was really interesting. And in talking to Coach Kopp at the end of the game on Friday night, he made it sound like by today, Tyson Richard would be back practicing in full pads, and that it was an injury where he could have gone back in the game if they needed him. Now we'll see what the case actually is this week in Lancaster, but it was a game where Cuba City just had to fight it out, go play by play, and battle it out with a team that was much different than the first time they played. And that brings up an interesting point about the game against Lancaster. Both of these teams are going to be different than how they saw each other week 2, and that's what makes it hard to predict how this one's going to turn out.
Yeah, with Lancaster diversifying their offense and kind of going back to the wishbone and stuff like that, that makes the matchup very intriguing coming up on a Friday night. It'll be Lancaster hosting Cuba City on 97.7 Country WGLR and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel coming up on Friday night. Other matchups in Division 6, again, because the seedings were so wrong. Belleville defeats Cambridge. The 8 seed beats the 1 seed 27-0. The number 1 seed gets shut out, thanks in part to a big-time performance by Belleville's Logan Durkee. 37 rushing attempts, 209 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns. Belleville now takes on the Marshall Cardinals, who beat Poynette, the 5 seed, over the 4 seed. The Marshall Cardinals 5-5 on the season, 4-3 out of the Eastern Suburban Conference. The winner of Lancaster Cuba City will have a guaranteed home game in level 3, taking on the winner of either Belleville or Marshall in level 3 next week. So that's our Division 6. Shark and Wally, some thoughts on the Division 6 matchups?
Well, as far as the matchups that we just saw, wouldn't you agree that this will probably be the last time that we see the computation of the playoff pairings done this way? I gotta believe that there might be a little more WIAA intervention into that, because certainly you would never see a situation that allows for Lancaster to have a home game against Cuba City, especially after Cuba City wins a conference and had beaten them in head-to-head. And I think you told me, Tyler, that head-to-head is not a major consideration. Well, I got to believe this upcoming offseason, that's probably number one. They'll put more weight on head-to-head, put more weight on things like conference championships and how the teams play, because you just can't allow that year in and year out. It's as if the tournament wasn't even seeded. We went back to the old days of just assigning teams, just fill in the blanks and hope for the best. We don't want those days again.
Well, I look at it too as I think this computer program and how they put it together, I thought was a joke. And I have one of those things that, to me, head-to-head competition is a primary concern. I don't care what anyone else thinks. To me, if you turn around and you can line up against, Team A against Team B, and Team A handles Team B relatively easy, that's got to be a factor as far as both teams being in the playoff. It's got to be. And chances are that team that won is probably going to finish ahead of the other team in the conference, unless there's really some other major things that happened during the year. But to me, that's still a major factor.
Yeah, I suspect that there is going to be some spirited conversation among the Wisconsin Football Coaches Association come December, and there's going to be some proposed changes to, come with the way teams are seeded, as Shark was alluding to earlier. Head-to-head matchups are determined or used in determining which teams get into the postseason as a whole. You need to have tiebreakers on that. But as far as the actual seeding itself, head-to-head matchups are not part of it. Conference championships are not part of it. It's just a formula based on your overall record, your opponent's record, your opponent's record. And again, there's no real transparency as to how things are weighted and how things are, because the only thing that I can come up with that makes any sort of rational sense as to how the teams are seeded is that there is a higher premium based on which division of teams you are playing. So, for example, Lancaster playing primarily D5 and D4 teams, that's a higher value as opposed to teams in Division 7 that are just playing Division 7 teams consistently. That's the only thing that I can point to that would make any sort of rational sense. But even in that case, how is Darlington a 2 seed when Cuba City beat them head to head, and Cuba City is a 3 seed in a division lower than them? Again, none of it really makes sense, and I think that there have been a ton of people asking questions. I know that there are coaches in this area that have sent multiple emails to the WIAA about, wanting an answer, an explanation on it. The WIAA has not come out with a statement. So it's going to, I think the way that anything is going to change, it's going to have to be the Wisconsin Football Coaches Association and the WIA getting into a room and, sorting this out. The thing that I like what Jerry Pettigrew proposed he proposed this for basketball, where you can do the electronic seating as an initial baseline and then have a subcommittee come back in and just kind of reallocate based on, team performances, the head-to-head matchups, things like that. I think you can use that as kind of a starting point, but that should not be the absolute, because computers don't watch football. Humans watch football. Humans play football. Humans coach football. If you don't have the human element as to how teams are seated and what their path looks like for a championship, that feels completely wrong.
Here comes the one most important thing we should always remember about the data you receive from the computer. Garbage in, garbage out. And that's what the seedings came about from the way the computer put it. And I think, Scott, you'll agree with me. When's the last time you heard the WIAA saying, you people are correct, we were wrong? Ain't gonna hear it.
Yeah, that's not gonna happen. And I can see some of the reasons why they stay away from conference champs and dig deeper into your opponent's wins and losses, because there are some conferences that are very weak, and they come out of their conference champ doesn't really mean much, and that's some of the Milwaukee area schools. They're not necessarily strong.
I look at something else too. If you want to start talking about the idea of playing a Division 6, Division 5, Division 7, whatever between divisions in games, how about all of a sudden if you're playing, and I'm going to go back a year, when we had the Ridge and Valley Conference as a 11-man conference. Really. So you end up and you're able to defeat teams in the Ridge and Valley Conference with ease, and yet you come back in and you find Ridge and Valley Conference teams getting a higher seed than you in a playoff? Come on. We all know better because we've seen it on the field over the years. It just doesn't work that way.
Yep. Well, I will say last year when the Ridge and Valley teams were seeded, so there were 4 teams that qualified for the postseason out of the Ridge and Valley Conference. All 4 teams had a road game. Even the conference champion Highland, they had to play at River Ridge. So in that instance, the computerized seeding worked because they didn't necessarily value the Ridge and Valley, schedule, the quality of opponents, in large part because everyone in the Ridge and Valley was 0-2 through the first 2 weeks of the season before they started playing each other. So again, the seeding is what it is. There's obviously we can't go back and redo it and things like that. But yeah, my goodness, were the seedings very wrong in Division 6. But those are the matchups that we have. Again, Lancaster hosting Cuba City on Super Hits or on 97.7 Country WGLR, and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel will also keep tabs on Belleville and Marshall in Division 6. The winners there go to Level 3 next week. The other bracket that has a lot of stuff wrong with it for Division 7, the way teams were seeded. We'll start off with Bangor, the number 1 seed, defeating Iowa Grant 49-14. Brock Hinderman of Iowa Grant, 19 of 36 passing for 219 yards and a touchdown. Also threw 2 interceptions. He did have 1 rushing touchdown. Bangor, as a team, ran the ball 40 times, had 336 rushing yards and 7 rushing touchdowns. They advanced to take on River Ridge, who the 5 seed, River Ridge, defeated the 4 seed, Cashton, by 4. Should be a solid matchup. River Ridge wins 55-14. Andrew Nice, a UW Platteville commit, oh, by the way, Wally, 10 attempts rushing, 123 yards and a touchdown. Also had 8 tackles and a pick 6 on his stat line. River Ridge running on the ground, 34 attempts for 311 yards and 4 touchdowns, which says to me, for the game that I will be on the call of on Friday night between River Ridge and Bangor on Extreme 107.1 of the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel, it's just going to be ground and pound football from start to finish, and it's going to be a trench warfare, rock fight type of game, and I'm very curious to see how River Ridge comes out, because I think to a degree, I think River Ridge feels a bit disrespected with the way that they were seated, that they have to go on the road. They had to go on the road against Cashion. They have to make another pretty lengthy road trip to Bangor, and depending on the result of the other game that we'll have on Super Hits 106 in the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel, if Cochran Fountain City upsets Potosi Cassville, River Ridge would then have to go to Cochran Fountain City, an even longer road trip. So I'm very curious to see how that plays out. Again, Potosi Cassville defeating Blackhawk Warren in what I'm calling the level 1 state championship game, because these two teams were certainly formidable enough to play at Camp Randall. Potosi Cassville defeating Blackhawk Warren 7-6. Real simple. Potosi Cassville, 34 rushing attempts, 237 yards, and 1 touchdown. Joe Haas scored the only touchdown for Potosi Cassville. Blackhawk Warren, 37 rushing attempts, 140 yards, and 1 rushing touchdown. That one from Owen Sefrud. Potosi Cassville taking on Cochran Fountain City, who defeated Seneca Wazeeka Steuben 12-7. The 7 seed hanging tough with the 2 seed. And for context there, Potosi Cassville beat Seneca Wazeeka Steuben earlier in the season 35-6. So, matchups that we have in Division 7 in Level 2. Bangor against River Ridge on Extreme 107.1 of the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. Potosi Cassville at Cochran Fountain City on Super Hits 106 and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. Wally, we'll start off with the Potosi Cassville Cochran Fountain City game. I'm of the mindset that Potosi Cassville feels very, very disrespected with the way that they were seated, the fact that they had to play Blackhawk Warren twice in a 7-day span, and they have to make a road trip to Cochran Fountain City. This is going to be very much a business trip type of game, and I would imagine that Potosi Cassville wants to get up big, get up early, and show them that they are one of, if not the best teams in Division 7. They are the top contender to bring home a gold ball in Madison.
Correct. That's really about the best thing I can say with it. No, they're not happy with the way this whole seeding went. They thought they were the best team in this bracket, and I really agree with them. I think they were the best team in this bracket. Cochran Fountain City is part of the Dairyland Conference. The Dairyland Conference is not known as being a high-powered conference. It hasn't been for as long as I can remember. And again, remember, I went to school many, many years ago at Winona State University, and the Dairyland Conference was there then, and it wasn't that good then. And it hasn't improved that much over the years. Once in a while, a team would come out of it that wasn't bad, but week after week, no, they couldn't. I don't think there's a team in that conference that could survive in the Six Rivers Conference for a season and come out of it near the top of the bracket. Now, there's my disrespect for Cochran Fountain City. I think we're turning around and we're looking at Potosi Cassville. This is pretty much a loaded team. They've got a lot of good things. They play fantastic defense. And my big joke, and Spangler liked this, the statement that I made to him. He said, how bad can a team be if they've got a hockey player playing on the outside who plays a wing in hockey? I'm sorry, you think you're going to get around this kid? Ooh, no, it's not going to happen. He can play. But I turn around and I look at Potosi in general. Good backfield, good quarterback, good line. Okay, so that's, first of all, that's offense, and that's going to be hard to stop. You have good receivers on top of it all, as well as a good running back. Then you go to the defensive side of the ball, where I think they're better on defense than they are on offense. I mean, they're really tough. If Cochran Fountain City were to be able to pull the upset and knock them off, then they have played, I have to say it, they have to have played above their head. And I briefly talked with the Cochrane Fountain City coach to get his lineups and all that kind of thing, and he sounded as if I'm really excited we get to play in level 2 of the playoffs. You better not be excited to be able to play in it. You better be excited because you're going to come through it and go to level 3. You'd better be excited about what comes after. No. And he was excited about playing in the game. So we'll see. I'm a big fan of Potosi Cassville, and I'm expecting to see them continue on.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to that one. Go ahead, Scott.
I really look like Potosi Cassville is kind of like Prairie Chien. Good offense, good defense, maybe not as strong as special teams, but they're well-rounded, very disciplined, and Coach Siegert is going to have those kids ready to play, and they run the offense, which I fell in love with. That gave me a lot of success, the wing T.
I get a charge out of it because of Potosi's offense. I always said that if I were ever a head coach, I would be based as a wing T with spread tendencies. Wait a minute, isn't that what Potosi is? And they make good use of both sides of that.
Yep.
We have the wing T truthers on the call for sure today. That's for sure. And then for River Ridge against Bangor, again, as I mentioned earlier, it feels like it's going to be one of those smash mouth ground and pound type of games. Bangor comes into the game with a record of 8-2. Their only losses, they lost in week 2 at Onalaska Luther, 28-0, and then lost to the conference champion of the Scenic Bluffs, Ithaca, 14-10. So a very respectable record, 8-2. River Ridge also 8-2. River Ridge, again, the 2 losses to Blackhawk Warren and Potosi Cassville by single digits, and in those matchups against the top teams of the conference, River Ridge was shorthanded. They had a number of injuries, Carter Copsey being one of them. They've had a couple of offensive linemen where they had to shuffle things around. So now it feels like River Ridge is going to be at full strength, and I'm very much anticipating that not only is River Ridge feeling disrespected with how they were seeded, but if there's an opportunity to play at Potosi Cassville in level 3, they want to take full advantage of it. And if they're at full strength, that is going to be one heck of a football game in level 3. But we're not going to jump too far ahead and plan our stay at Potosi High School coming up in level 3. But we'll see how the matchups play out in Division 7. Again, Bangor hosting River Ridge on Extreme 107.1 on the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel, and then Potosi Cassville going to Cochrane Fountain City on Super Hits 106 and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel.
With guys broadcasting for La Crosse Radio and up at West Salem. And the one guy said he had seen Bangor play twice this year. And he said, and one of them was the Onalaska Luther game. And he just simply made the comment, I don't understand how Bangor could be a number 1 seed. He said, they're not bad, but they're not that good. They're not the Bangor I've remembered seeing playing in the past. I've seen Bangor play a number of times over the years, and they have a nice program. They really do. And they've built something pretty good there. This, to me, the way these other guys who've seen them play talk about it, I get the impression while they're a pretty good team, they're not the Bangor that we remember. They're not quite at that level. And I'm looking at Potosi Cassville, River Ridge, playing at a level beyond where I've seen them play in the past. So I think this could end up being a little bit of a Donnybrook game where River Ridge may want this game more than the Bangor kids do.
Yeah, we talk about how much, the Six Rivers Conference has a ton of respect for the way that they play a physical brand of football. Bangor defeating Iowa Grant, a quote unquote Six Rivers team. They are in the Six Rivers Conference, so they are a Six Rivers team by definition. But they don't. Iowa Grant is a air raid type of offense. This is going to be a completely different stylistic matchup for Bangor coming up against River Ridge, and I'm very excited to see how that one plays out. Let's finish things up with 8-player football, where our favorite Highland Cardinals defeated Oakfield 28-8. Caden Washa had 2 rushing attempts for 35 yards and put it in the end zone both times. John Dreschmeyer had 100 yards receiving, 124 yards with 6 receptions. And now the Cardinals will take on North Crawford. Gary and Scott, you will have the call of that one on ESPN Radio AM 1590 WPVL coming up on Friday night. Our first look at the Highland Cardinals in the postseason. Gary, we saw them against Belmont. Matthew, you got to see Highland earlier this season as well. A nice win to begin, and a very, very intriguing matchup with North Crawford, because this is a rematch of a game that they had back on October 4th, where Highland won 16-6. A very physical football game by the way that it sounded. Very curious to see how this one plays off Friday night, Gary.
Yeah, Highland has a lot of seniors on that roster. I mean, almost half of the team are seniors, and they run the ball almost as well as they throw the ball. Bennett Smith has complete command of that offense. The defense they fly around. They play good, solid defensive line play. Excuse me. And I had a chance to talk to Jeremy Fredette, the head coach of the North Crawford Trojans, this morning for a little bit. And I brought up the fact that they had lost earlier in the season. And he says, we thought we were an outstanding team. And he says, coming away from that with that 10-point loss, he says, I found some spots. He says, which you always do. Excuse me. We found some spots where we needed to improve. And he says, I think we have. So he says, I don't think Highland will come in looking like they're going to, beat us again. He says, if they do, he says, they're going to earn it. He said, it's going to be a pounding game. He says, whoever wins this is going to come away with an earn.
Yep, agreed. And Scott, this feels like it's going to be a defensive battle. It's not something that you normally think of when you think of 8-player football. You kind of think, spread the ball out, kind of get into open spaces, kind of arena football, type of matchup. But, you and I have gotten to see, teams like Belmont and DeSoto go at it and, have those really physical types of football games. This is going to be a classic trench warfare type of matchup, it feels like.
Yeah, it's going to be a great defensive game. Yeah, you're right about the 8-man football. It's usually a high-scoring game, very fast. But when you got two good defenses, it can slow you down a little bit. And, I was talking to one of the Highland coaches, and Highland's one of those teams, again, is very strong in all three assets of the game. But they tend to shoot themselves in the foot. And like he said, if they don't shoot themselves in the foot, they're going to be tough to stop. But if they create mistakes, they could cost them the game. So in North Crawford, playing them already fixes some of the things that they saw in that game. They can get stronger. And I remember when we went to state in 2003, we lost our opening game to Pecatonica. And that was probably the best loss that we had, because the kids refocused themselves and put themselves in a position that they knew that there are teams out there that could beat us. So they can't just think they're going to walk away with everything. And North Crawford is probably looking at that same thing. That was a good loss. They learned things, and come Friday night, one that doesn't make the most mistakes is going to win.
And that loss with that North Crawford suffered was in the middle of September. So they've had a lot of time to analyze what went wrong, try to fix what they thought was wrong. I look forward to having the Trojans having a pretty good game plan against the Cardinals. That should be, I think it's going to be a barn burner.
Yeah, North Crawford.
A comment that you made there, Scott, that I think is really going to be the big thing in a lot of the games we've talked about. Who makes mistakes?
Yep.
And that's going to be really the key to almost every game that we've talked about. It's he who makes the least amount of mistakes and plays their normal game is more likely than not going to come out on the top. More likely than not. Because the key to a game is always turnovers, penalties. Those are two major keys to any game. And you get past them, and if you don't have those issues, you're going to be tough to beat.
Yep, agreed. It'll be Highland and North Crawford coming up on Friday night on ESPN Radio, AM 1590 WPVL and AM 1590 WPVL.com. So that covers all the teams that are remaining in the matchups that we have coming up on a Friday night. Let's move into our players of the week. And I'll start off first with Matthew. Any players that you want to recognize for the level one set of players of the week?
For my players of the week for level one, I'm going to go with guys that have been doing it all season long for their teams, Andrew Nice and Blake Thierry, two very solid running backs. They got it done. They know their identity and their role on the team, and they've got a potential with their teams to make some pretty special runs this postseason.
Yeah, two of the three that I was picking. Shark, your players of the week.
Well, I got to believe that for Lancaster, Devon White, did I have that right? Devon Wright.
Devin Clark?
No. Oh gosh. Devin Clark. There we go. Yep. So Devin Clark, he had another great game. He's been having a lot of good games, especially on defense for the Lancaster Flying Arrows. He seemed to be all over the place. He seems to go from sideline to sideline quite well, and chases down running backs that are trying to get out to the edge, and just does not let those players to get big yardage. So yeah, Clark with several good games this year, and another one this past Friday night, helping the Lancaster Flying Arrows stymie Westby in that game on Friday, 29-7.
Right, he was our scrapper of the game. He was a complete disruptor at that defensive end spot. Scott, your player of the week.
I'm going to look at two. I like Blake Thierry until somebody stops him. He is going to be an exceptional player. And, when you think about where he's going, Indiana, and what Indiana is doing right now,
no kidding, yeah.
It's a good fit for him. The other one is Nolan Hankey. I liked what he has done since he started coming on in the middle of the season. And I bet you that they're going to lean on him a little bit more. And if he can run the ball like he has been, he could be a force that could put Lancaster over the top.
Yep, I like it. Gary, your player of the week.
Well, I'm going to go with two of them as well. In the Platteville game, TJ Pink, 247 yards passing. And the other one, Wally and I had talked about it even before the game started Friday night, that someone other than Lucas Ludlam was going to have to carry a load as far as receiving goes. Ludlam had double coverage all night. My other one is going to be Jerron Blevins. He had only had 3 catches, but 110 yards. And he had a beautiful reception on that, what was it? I think it was 60-some yard touchdown pass from Pink. He took a lot of weight off. The other ones, I'll give an honorable mention, Myron Ryder. Those guys stepped up. Ludlam had a few catches in there himself, but between Pink and Blevins, I thought those are my two scrappers.
All right, excellent. Wally, your player of the week.
I kind of leaned back a little bit towards Blevins as well. I mean, it's one thing being able to catch the ball.
Yep.
A lot of guys can catch the ball. It's what do you do after you catch it? And one of the things that I didn't realize is our second edition of being able to see a Blevins kid on the field. Can he match his brother? The answer to the question is yes. And again, he's a young man that we'll get to see next year as well. This is a kid who can pick him up and put him down. He's got some nice speed. He catches the ball well, and he makes some nice moves while he's out on the field. And I know the one pass in particular, the 62-yarder, he had to fight for that one, and he won.
Yep.
I mean, I look at it as the fact that he had 2 catches for 100 yards. I'd take that. I put that guy up there pretty high, and I'm going back really on almost the whole season when I in really 2 seasons when I mentioned Pink.
Mhm.
This is a kid that came out of nowhere. And all of a sudden, Platteville became good because he could throw the ball with consistency, on the money, and actually could run the ball well enough himself to keep people honest. I mean, that's kind of over a career, really, in that particular case. But I think he deserves that kind of credit because, again, he did come from kind of nowhere. And all of a sudden, everyone said, who's this Pink kid?
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, he's got passing records, doesn't he,
Yes.
with the last 2 seasons that he's had? So yeah, an outstanding
I don't
performance.
believe
Yeah.
he surpassed. There's a couple of kids. I'd have to go dig back through all the records that I got buried somewhere that I haven't dug out yet from our move. I'm not so certain he's set school records on any of those yet for sure. But if he hasn't, he certainly moved himself up high in the record books.
Yeah.
And you have to give him credit for that.
Absolutely. All right, and the only other player that I'll submit for Player of the Week, I'm going to go slightly off the grid a little bit, but going to go with Belleville's Logan Durkee again. 37 rushing attempts for 209 yards and 3 touchdowns. I mean, that is an outstanding performance. Belleville, the 8 seed, defeating the number 1 seed, allegedly, Cambridge, 27-0. No disrespect to Cambridge or any Cambridge people that may or may not watch this show, but the seedings are what they are. You're a number 1 seed and you lost to the 8 seed, you got shut out. Yep. And Logan Durkee, a big reason for that. Let's move into.
Can I throw in something as a Player of the Week that has nothing to do with high school football?
Please do.
That would be a wide receiver for the University of Wisconsin Platteville.
Jeez.
An 82-yard touchdown pass reception in the WIAC does not happen. And Blaine Stair did it. And I couldn't believe it when I saw it. It's a matter of catching the ball, but then fighting through traffic and to go 92 yards is phenomenal. Not only did he do that, he is now the all-time leading receiver for a career in touchdown receptions. That's going even way back when all Platteville ever did was throw the ball. Gosh, Shark, how many years ago was that?
Well, that would have been when Mike Emmendorfer came to town.
Before Emmendorfer.
And you're talking about like the 1972 team?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, here's a kid who all of a sudden now has beaten those records.
Yeah, that's Rich Smigelsky in that group. Yeah. Yeah, yes. I remember about those things. And here's what's even more impressive about all that, Wally, is that Stair is doing this at a time when UW Platteville, and keep in mind these kids were high school athletes just a few years ago, playing probably in this area. But we'll take Matt Kent, who played at Blackhawk. He caught 1 million passes, I swear, at UW Platteville. And of course, let's not forget Brunson Parish. And let's also not forget Justin Leonard, who is now the coach at Mineral Point. And then, of course, our favorite was number 7 for the Pioneers. I'm trying to remember his name now. You remember him, Wally?
Assistant coach. I'm giving you a lead in.
He, of course, ended up in the NFL with the New Orleans Saints. Dan Arnold. Yep, Dan Arnold. So think about that. Those are big names. And here, Brent Stair, another just young guy. He's right up there with them.
And see, and Arnold was one of those players that I remember his junior year, Brad Richardson and I on the call for a lot of games. We coined the fact that all he did is catch touchdowns.
He did.
It seemed like that's what he was doing all the time across the back of the end zone.
It just goes to show there's just a lot of great athletes out there.
Oh, and incidentally, if you have not seen UW Platteville play, you need to.
Mm-hmm.
It's worth it.
All right, those are UW Platteville PSA on the high school football roundup for this week. Let's move into the team or teams of the week, and since we were just talking about Belleville, I'm going to go with them as my team of the week this week again. An outstanding performance. They have a ton of momentum on their side, and could potentially find themselves in level 3 after a really rough start to begin their season. So that's who I'm putting in for the team of the week. Matthew, your team of the week this week.
I'm also going to go with Belleville just for the fact that I think getting an 8 seed and knowing you have to play a 1 seed, regardless of whether teams are actually that good or not, still seeing that number in front of a team name is a mental challenge that the players have to get over. And the way in which Belleville was able to win, and as you said, the way they started the season, it's just been really impressive to watch them do what they've been able to do, especially last week. And I think that's more than enough to earn them the title for Team of the Week.
And I like it. Shark, your team of the week.
I think I'm going to go with the Darlington Redbirds. Not an easy task to move up a division. Granted, maybe your competition for this level 1 playoff, playing Richland Center. Richland Center, a good team. They made the playoffs. They don't really have a big history when it comes to winning playoff games, but Darlington really held its own, winning that first Division 5 playoff game and advancing. So divisions, smaditions, I guess, for the Darlington Redbirds.
Playing up a weight class, so to speak, and looked really good in that first level 1 playoff. Scott, your team of the week.
I'm going to be a little different. I'm going to be cognizant. I'm going to give my team of the week to all those teams from our area that won their games and are moving on to play Friday night. They deserve a pat in the back and a good luck Friday night.
All right, so all the winners, team of the week for this week.
Yep.
Gary, your team of the week.
Well, I'm going to go with Potosi Cassville.
Yeah.
To be ranked number 1 in the state in Division 7 from week 1 to the very last week, get seeded 3rd in that division, and then have to turn around and play the same opponent that you played, as you had said, earlier, 7 days before, and then grind out a 7-6 win. I think Potosi Cassville's out to prove something, and it started last week with that win against Blackhawk Warren. So I'm going to go with Potosi Cassville.
All right, I like it. Wally, your team of the week.
It's one of the things that I think is real difficult, and that's why, Scott, I think your idea of picking the winners of the games here makes kind of a lot of sense. But if I wanted to put the spotlight anywhere, I'm really going a couple of different places. It's kind of like the second, if we're in a play and we're going to talk about, what is it? The number 2 person, that's going to be on stage. I would go with Belleville, because what they've done, I thought, was pretty phenomenal to do that. But as my team that I have to pick, I have to also go with Potosi and give Potosi Cassville. Going through that kind of a thing that you had to go through here at the end of the season just shouldn't happen. And I want to give Blackhawk Warren an awful lot of credit.
Oh yeah,
because they knew they were going to be in for a tough game, and the coaches did the work they had to do and had the players ready to come up against Potosi Cassville. It's too bad. It's too bad they were in this bracket.
Yeah.
It's too bad they weren't in the bracket, right below them in here, because I think that this is a team that could have found themselves playing Potosi Cassville to become the actual state qualifier. Or if they'd have been on opposite sides, could have played in the game in Camp Randall. I thought both of those teams were at that level. So that's giving Potosi Cassville a lot of credit to be able to pull that off.
Yeah, it doesn't feel right that Blackhawk Warren season is over just because of the way that the brackets matched up. We've known Blackhawk Warren is, a state contender. I mean, they were at the state championship game a year ago. Wally and I were on the call of that.
Exactly.
And it just feels, it doesn't feel right that, 1 week we're billing it as the number 1 team versus number 3 team in the state, and then the following week Potosi Cassville is number 3 and Blackhawk Warren is number 6 in their own bracket because of a computerized system. It doesn't make sense. And if I'm a Blackhawk Warren fan, I know I speak for all of us. We feel awful for you guys. There's no reason that matchup should have happened at that level.
No.
I mean, that is a state championship caliber matchup, and they had to play twice in a 7-day span. It's
Yep.
yeah, not
To me, for any of us that are unhappy with the way all of this came out and the way the brackets were lined up and so on, it's all about the area teams to prove that it was wrong and win.
Yep. Disrespect can be one heck of a motivator, and I certainly think for teams like Potosi Cassville, like Cuba City, they're on a warpath. I'll group River Ridge in there as well. So we'll see how that how all that shakes out. We would normally have this spot reserved for Steve's High Five. However, it's the postseason. We are not doing Steve's High Five, and Steve is not on the show to defend any sort of list. So I'm going to turn things around, and we're going to end the show with this, because we have been saying not so nice things about Steve and the way that he's been ranking teams in our area.
That's okay. Steve doesn't mind.
But I get it. But I'm going to go around. Can someone say one nice thing about Steve Prestegard? And we'll end the show on that high note.
He's a mammal.
Well, you could say he's a Badger fan.
He is a Badger fan. He is a mammal. Both are accurate.
He's a pretty good editor.
Place.
What's that, Scott?
He's got the heart in the right place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, he does. Gary,
Now,
never met
anything nice?
He's never met a sports broadcast
Mark
and he didn't like.
understand this more than the rest of you because you've never been there. Mark, Steve knows how much I love him because guess what I'm going to do for him Friday night?
What's that?
I'm going to introduce him to my favorite bar and grill in Winona, Minnesota,
Oh, yes.
where he can order the #1 and he could say, oh, good heavens. You mean Kyle Cooper and these other guys actually ate one? Yep. And he's going to say, I don't know how they did it, but he's going to love it.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
So it's kind of like a cult initiation more than anything else, but
He will be very happy with his meal. I will guarantee it.
Yeah.
Yep. I will say Steve does oftentimes take the not so desirable games and is willing to make road trips for us and cover games like volleyball tonight, which is where he's broadcasting. He might be off the air now. I'm not sure. Hopefully the volleyball matches were real quick. He had a doubleheader while we were recording this show. So yeah, no mean things will be said about Steve on this episode. At least we'll see if he's on next week, and then we can unleash on him. Matthew, anything else?
I'll say with all the game prep he does, I guess you could say he's a nerd in a good way. He knows what he's talking about some of the times.
Yeah.
Some of the time.
Yeah, he's our historian and our chief meteorologist too. If there's any potential for rain, he will make sure that he will text you and make sure you have an umbrella and make sure that your equipment is protected. He may or may not be speaking from experience in those instances. So yeah, and the other thing, congrats to the Cassville Comets, the high school football mascot challenge champions. The Cassville Nation showed out and overwhelmingly took down the Bagley Indians. The Cassville school will receive 10 family-sized pizzas courtesy of Papa Murphy's of Platteville and Prairie du Chien. And it was a very fun mascot challenge. It was very interesting, especially in those middle rounds before Cassville decided to just completely take over the voting and just vote nonstop on everything related to it, kind of sabotaging the results a bit. But that was the purpose of the event. Go vote as many times as you want to. Don't do that on Tuesday. Vote only once. But of course. But yeah, congratulations again to Cassville, the Cassville Comets. And I will say I am glad that it was a unique mascot that did ultimately win the mascot challenge. It's not something that's too overly common or kind of a cliched team name. So congrats again, Cassville, our mascot challenge champions in 2024.
I have to give credit where credit's due. Tyler, guys coming up with that idea to do the mascot challenge, I think is awesome because it brings something back to the area, to the schools in the area, even the ones that are no longer operating. I mean, after all, we won't talk about the midgets, but the Mighty Midgets could have been in there, but they didn't quite get enough votes. And I looked at all the other teams and how they were able to do that. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, we'll see if we can bring it back for boys basketball and girls basketball. We'll see how the stuff shakes out. But yeah, let's get Castle their 10 family-sized pizzas first before we bring up another competition. So again, just to recap the games that we have coming up on Friday night on Queen Bee Radio on 97.7 Country WGLR, it'll be Lancaster hosting Cuba City in Division 6. A pair of Division 7 games, we have River Ridge at Bangor on Extreme 107.1 on the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel, Potosi Cassville at Cochrane Fountain City on Super Hits 106 on the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. And then in 8-player football, Highland is hosting North Crawford, again on AM 1590 WPVL and AM 1590 WPVL.com. And that wraps up this week's episode of the Papa Murphy's of Platteville and Prairie du Chien High School Football Roundup. Again, check out Papa Murphy's $7.99 everyday value lineup. It's a big deal for a small price. Get a large pizza with new shredded pepperoni, crumbled sausage, or classic cheese for $7.99 each, which means you can afford big-time deliciousness at Papa Murphy's of Platteville and Prairie du Chien. For Gary Craugh, Wally Trouten, Matthew Goninen, Scott Tolzman, and Mark Evenstad, I'm Tyler Diktanas. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you for another episode of the High School Football Roundup next week on the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel.